What a day.
Same here. You ready?
Please.
Elitist. That must be what it is. But yeah, so we're back. And we're back on Anna in the tropics.
That's right.
With more things. It's not that I'm tending bar. These are all fake. If we had more than 45 minutes to do this episode, I would walk you through. The props actually look really nice on the show. But yeah. So
but I think we should do every show with a bar behind us. You know.
Does it fit with today's theme? Was there much drinking in Jane Austen?
In her novels?
Yes.
There's not a whole lot, but there's some.
Okay.
Yes, it doesn't figure prominently.
It's not a big theme.
There's no hunky bartender that keeps reappearing in someone's
with the Cuban
goals.
cigars. And there are some fun props off stage here too.
Yes,
but we wouldn't touch.
We never touch other people's props.
No, we would not possibly do that.
Which sounds like a dirty joke, but we don't. It's true. We don't.
That's not a euphemism. We don't touch other people's props. Maybe a little euphemism. Anyway, so as we were, again, assembling our first few episodes here for you guys, as we were going through themes, Juliana and I have a lot in common, but we also have a lot that differs a little bit. So we've picked a couple topics here where, for this episode, Juliana's primarily driving, because this is one of her big passion things, particularly currently.
Yes.
And then coming down the road a little bit, we're going to take a hard left turn into my classic rock love and where that intersects with theater, because it does. So,
which is not in my wheelhouse.
No, it's fun. It's the teacher and the student and the ease of the back and forth, the repartee.
Right.
So all of my that out of the way, I am turning the microphone almost exclusively over to Juliana for this one. I will add commentary that may or may not enhance the educational value of the episode.
Well, this again is one of those things where it's like drinking from the fire hose. I mean, where do you start to discuss something like this? So I was preparing for a series of auditions for a Jane Austen work, and so I got fairly deep into that world, and I've always enjoyed Jane Austen, but I never appreciated certain sides of her art and what she offered, English literature, until recently, and I became really enamored, especially by this book that Paula Byrne wrote. Now, she was fairly well known for writing the book called The Real Jane Austen, which was a fairly important biography, and a lot of Jane Austen fans, are going to be familiar with that. She went on to write this book called The Genius of Jane Austen, subtitled Her Love of Theater and Why She Works in Hollywood. Which is clever.
We can put this in the show notes.
So
people can go look for it.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So here's the thing. I always thought of Jane Austen as kind of frou-frou literature.
Right.
The chick flick of the day. I always thought it was like a very girly girl thing. I was really wrong. And I think that some of it is because what you're going to cover, actually, you're welcome, in how her works have been portrayed in film,
right?
Particularly in our own generation.
Right.
There's been a huge focus on just the romance. Will he? Will she? Won't they? Will
Costume
they get together?
Drama. Yeah. There's definitely a distinct style when you think of a Jane Austen adaptation. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And the key word is adaptation, because the actual works are not so. In fact, just beyond her death, people were hailing her as great as Shakespeare. What makes her important as a writer in this period is that she had a really strong sense of dramatic dialogue. A lot of the popular novels that were written at the time were very much third person, describing all kinds of other things except the drama that's going on. in the dialogue, in the conversations. And as I want to get into, she has a background in loving the theater.
Yeah, she does.
She and her family, they love to read aloud together, plays, and they actually ranked novels with how well they did to being read aloud multiple times. Can you come back to them? Do they stand up to being enjoyed a second or third time in a group reading? And she also had very strict ideas about how the characters in her novel should be read aloud. So she definitely had some preferences in wanting to have her stuff read as dramatic work. So this is kind of a fun thing. Again, there's a lot of information here, and you can go down a rabbit hole, and I'm just picking out the things that are just most especially exciting to me.
Go down a rabbit hole with lots of information. We never do that on this show. I don't know what you speak of.
All right, you ready?
All the time.
You ready? Okay.
Yes.
So I really want to focus on Jane Austen and the theater. So she was clearly influenced by this vogue in the particularly late 18th century, early 19th century, for what is called private theatricals. Not only as an audience member, she was actively engaged in actually doing amateur dramatics at her home and in private theatricals in Kent, Southampton, and in Winchester. So the genteel British society in the late 18th and 19th centuries, they were obsessed with private theatricals. It was very fashionable in aristocratic circles to have your own children's theater or your own amateur theaters, either in your private home or in a special space that you've built to put on. They referred to it frequently as theater fever. Private productions often got more press than the theaters licensed for public performance. Right. And Austen clearly had an interest in writing about private theater. In fact, one of her early sketches in 1792, it's just a sketch called The Three Sisters. It portrays a greedy, self-seeking young woman who demands a private built theater as part of her marriage settlement.
Okay.
I love that.
Well, as demands go, I'm thinking here like prenup. As prenups go, if I was like, but if we ever divorce, you need to give me a theater.
Yeah.
Small demand. Minor. So minor.
Jane Austen distinguishes between the fashionable elitist theater and those, by the way, were often lampooned by the newspapers.
Yeah.
And those of the squirearchy. Now that's the new term for me, the squirearchy.
Yeah.
That's just landed gentry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, England. Oh, England.
But it's not necessarily like a noble
Yeah,
person.
okay.
So you're part of this upper class, but you're you live in the country. You're the Downton Abbey folk upstairs.
Yes.
That's the squirearchy. By all accounts, Jane Austen was an intelligent observer of the intrigues, the emotions, the excitement of private theater, of rehearsals, of reading over scripts, and casting of parts. It's an inside job. Yeah. She knows how all of this was done. James Edward Austen's memoir, that's Jane Austen's nephew, wrote memoir. And he wrote of her, she was an early observer, and it may be reasonably supposed that some of the incidents and feelings which are so vividly painted in the Mansfield Park theatricals are due to her recollection of these entertainments. Also, in Jane Austen's private correspondence, in her novels, in her sketches and work, she's throwing out punchlines and inside jokes referring to the plays that were popular at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So it would be, like us quoting
Nudge,
a
wink,
movie.
wink. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And she does that frequently. So like a lot of these are just coming out because
I feel like that's sort of in human nature, though. I mean, like, we sort of in-reference things all the time, whether it be, I don't know, I feel like I'm rolling back to our last episode, talking about Black Mirror episodes and being able to shorthand it too. It's like that tech that they had in the, you're constantly referencing, especially if it was something that really was impactful to you or just to ground it in where you are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why were private theatricals such a big deal in this time, you ask?
I might ask, but I'm also sitting here thinking that I feel like, and maybe it's just those of us who are theatrically inclined, but how many of us staged things in our living room when we were kids, or like our backyard, or So I guess I'm not finding it all that strange because of my background. But perhaps you out there are thinking, why would you do this to your home? Why? what silly craziness is this? I barely touch my home, so I just dust it.
But isn't it great? That's what they did for fun.
Oh no, I love that idea.
Entertain themselves.
Well, also we're talking about pre-TV, pre-radio. We're talking about how do you entertain yourself. I mean, and there's something to be said for, in our age of screens and electronics and the book of face, there's something to be said for, staging a piece of work, live theater right in your home.
Yeah.
I mean, and then having your friends come over and be like, hey, let's all watch this together.
Yeah.
And she did some of her first writing little plays, didn't she, within that? It's a great training ground. You're learning it, you're doing it, and I think, as I recall from what I do know, she was doing this from as just a teen, like a young kid. She was doing some writing.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, one of the first theatricals that we think Jane Austen observed in her home was this tragedy called Matilda.
Okay.
Interestingly, they never.
Not Roald Dahl.
Her family, right? Her family never did did a tragedy again after that. Actually, it was not.
Mrs.
I don't know that they loved
terrified her. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the little fun fact. But I think she was 8 or 9.
Yeah, no.
When that first exposure, and she was exposed not just to a performance of it, but obviously the entire choosing of parts and rehearsing and bringing people in.
That's the kind of thing that I nerded out to when I was a kid. I mean, we weren't writing original pieces. I was taking my little cassette tape of the most recent Disney movie and staging Beauty and the Beast in the backyard on our concrete slab. But I guess it's somewhat related. I would stage as much of the dialogue as I remembered, and my friends would hang out with me, and then when we got to the Gaston number, we threw water at the people who came to see us, because it was supposed to be beer. That went around.
I get it.
See, we had props and we had staging.
Yeah.
But we also knew that we had to do
immersive theater.
It was immersive theater, and I'm just happy that we didn't incorporate glitter in any capacity, or we'd still be finding it today.
Nice, I'm sure. That's funny. So in 1737, there was a licensing act. It's called the Licensing Act of 1737. Okay.
You don't say.
Yeah, it's true. It confined legitimate theatrical performances to 2 patented playhouses in London, Drury Lane and Covent Garden.
That's a buzzkill.
And if you think that's bad, it prohibited the performance of plays elsewhere for, here's the quote, hire, gain, or reward. And it gave the Lord Chamberlain statutory powers to examine all plays. Okay?
Government ruins everything. What?
Yeah, so, but the monopoly was broken in 1740, just a couple years later, when Henry Guilford reestablished his theater in Goodman's Fields and avoided the hire, gain, and reward clause by claiming to charge only for the music and giving the play for free. The authorities tolerated it until the great David Garrick joined the company in 1741, and their unprecedented success got them offers for both Garrick and Gifford to work at Drury Lane. And then Goodman Fields was then again closed because their producer
got too big.
Got hired. Yeah.
Right.
Other theater managers, they found ways of avoiding. It was a £50 fine for performing.
That times money. That's not small potatoes.
Yeah. Samuel Foote sold tickets inviting the public to drink a dish of chocolate with him at noon and provided entertainments free of charge, therefore inventing the matinee.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. And this led to his obtaining a summer patent for his little theater in the Haymarket in 1766. Foote's patent was followed by a number of patents for country or seasonal theaters. Summer stock, y'all.
Hey, yo.
That's it. Jane Austen was clearly very familiar with the actors of the period. 2 in particular, Mrs. Siddons, she kind of obsesses over in the same way I obsess over Kate Winslet, Kate Beckinsale.
You get celebs.
She writes, I could swear at her for disappointing me. And one performance that her understudy had to go on for her.
The fine tradition of the poor understudy feeling like garbage. I paid to see Hugh Jackman in The Boy from Oz. I don't want to know who this man is who isn't Hugh Jackman.
Kind of. And Mrs. Edwin, whose performance is just what it used to be, she wrote. So she's clearly very familiar with the scope of these actresses' career and what they do, and familiar enough with their work to be able to say, I was really sad that she didn't go on. And she speaks on them. That's the way people spoke of the stars back in the day. Yeah, she was. She was a bit of a fangirl for Mrs. Siddons. She was very familiar with the range and the repertoire of each theater. Her taste was eclectic. She enjoyed the farces, musical comedy, and pantomime, which those three all were considered to be low theater, right? As much as she enjoyed Shakespeare, Coleman, and Garrick. So she's pretty well-rounded in that regard. So specifically, why do her novels work in the theater?
Seems kind of natural.
Right now it seems obvious. Going back to the idea that she understood very well dialogue. Right. Love and Friendship, for example, is very much a farce. It's very much in the style of Sheridan. It's burlesque. It's pointing at hypocrisy in the main characters, whereas Sense and Sensibility is pointing at the hypocrisy of other characters. So she understood dynamics that are fairly complex when we go to script analysis, and she is extremely consistent. So it can be very obvious to adapt a Jane Austen novel to theater or to the screen, just because she understood so well characters and dialogue.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of the source material a lot of times can guide how easily something is adapted. I'm just thinking in terms of particularly authors who really just seem in love with the description of everything, and they get so far off on that the dialogue does become secondary.
That's right.
You almost have to sort of create what's around it and hope that make sure that it sounds like it could have been written by that author.
Or they spend so much time describing the intentions of the character instead of just showing us what they did and leave it up to us to infer.
There's a fine art to dialogue.
Absolutely.
Fine art.
Sense and Sensibility, in fact, was started as an epistolary novel where the main characters were writing in their diaries or letters. And then it became, from then, she did shift it over into a novel. But she experimented with both of those. And both of those forms do lack a narrator's voice. Finally, she does go to third-person narration. But the narrator is... often has a dramatic quality. That narrative voice has dramatic quality to it that's similar to, and nowadays, like Jane the Virgin has a narrator. Do you know the show?
Yeah.
I love it. Where that narrator is like his own character, and he's quite lovable.
Yeah.
You kind of fall in love with him there. What's interesting about the way she's writing is she has incredible dramatic detail. She was described by critics as having intelligible but simple signs, like movements. Movements with a knife and a fork, a mistake made by playing cards, thrusting her head outside the window to cool her flushed face. All of these convey extreme emotions, intense emotions beneath the exterior, but she doesn't comment on it. She just leaves it there. Jane Austen writes about her characters having different reactions to the exact same situation. Yeah, that's what a play is most of the dramatic action. Yeah. Signs or actions, like when a character rolls paper or cuts it with scissors, it's used to suggest emotional turmoil. And she uses props and gestures the same way that we would on stage, the same way we would have stage directions.
That's leaning into a Freudian place.
Oh, for sure. Oh, there's a whole other book on that. Yeah, it's called something about. She's got a unique novelistic voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
for her time. And she is an important writer, and important in the fact to us as actors in that her stuff is so easily translatable to what's happening on the stage or on screen.
What's interesting for me, kind of spinning back into her biography a little bit, one of the things that I seem to recall is actually, though her formal education period wasn't super long at all, and a lot of her book learning actually came from actually reading books that was in the family's library or just starting to write from that young age.
Yeah. She and her sister were sent away to school, and there's some really kind of funny stuff about it, like their teacher didn't speak a word of French.
Oh boy.
Which was funny to them because they students could have these conversations that their teacher wasn't aware of. But also the teacher spoke quite flamboyantly about theaters and actors and actresses and works.
Like an academic talking about theater versus someone who actually is like, oh yeah, well, we're staging stuff in our backyard right now. So, okay, come back and talk to me after you've cast a few things. You know what you're talking about.
So, I have here a discussion sidebar. 3 things.
I love how you planned sidebars.
I did.
I just throw them everywhere.
Yeah. So here's what I'm distracted by. 1, live theater will never die. It is not a dying art form. I have colleagues say that everyone's going to film and TV. Yeah. Not so. We will always want live theater. We will always want to be in the room where it happens. But when we have people participating in a playwright's imagination, an artist's imagination, it becomes between us, and that is theater. That's where the theater lies. And the idea that we're all participating in not just this exercise in our imagination, but in sensory. Yeah. The sensory experience of it.
There are a bunch of different places this applies. The value of the live experience is just huge. I mean, first of all, funny because like I said, we're going to do rock music in adaptations moving on. One of the things that has been said is like, the proliferation of online music and the electronic form has really ruined the ability of album sales. They're like, nobody's making money anymore. And I was like, oh, you mean you really have to go out and tour again and go out and live, really? I think in a strange way, and it's not a totally popular opinion with some of my friends, but I was like, we moved into a place where you were able to cut a really good album and then never have to go out in front of your people.
Right,
and
to make a living.
Yeah, but really, it should be both, really. And so forcing these groups back out on the road, I don't see it as a bad thing. And the other place where, the difference between a live performance versus something that's sort of simulated or after the fact, like a film or whatever, comes in. I do a lot of Henson style Muppet puppeteering, and when CG really started to step into play, and there was a move away from practical effects and practical, really the human eye knows when it's synthesized versus actually being performed in front of you, and they're discovering this in special effects in a lot of movies. They're starting to take some things back to practicals, even we could create in the computer busting through that wall, or we could just run something through the wall, because when you're talking about the layers you need to put on it to make it look authentic, you're never going to be perfectly right. Now that feels like a challenge to CG artists out there, but I'm telling you, you're still never going to get it 100% correct, because no matter how good the CG in something is, you are going to look back on it a few years later and be like, oh, I think the first time I ever really noticed that was the Lord of the Rings movies from the early 2000s. I mean, it does hold up pretty well, but then you look at it and you're like, okay, yeah, that's definitely computer generated. So I think there's always going to be the need for live performance, be it music, be it puppeteering, be it theater, any of it. There's something you can't replace that just being in the room feeling.
It'll never die.
Never.
It will never die.
Never.
Yeah. Another thought here. Produce yourself.
Yeah.
Produce yourself. I've been told that my entire career, but this is a 300-year-old thing here, that when you don't have the license or the union card to perform what you want to perform, put it on yourself.
Make your content.
Make your own content.
And it's also, with my puppeteering, I did a web series for 5 years. We're still technically alive, but we haven't done, we're in a bit of a hiatus right now. But
taking a break.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people were saying, oh God, puppeteering is dead. Nobody's doing the Muppets anymore, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, we're going to do a show, and we're going to make it a retro, loving, card to the 80s, like,
Yeah.
and a Valentine to the 80s.
Yeah.
And we had a nice hardcore group of people who were like, oh my God, nobody does this anymore. This is great.
Yeah.
So there you go, as far as being like, well, nobody does that anymore. And it's like, well, I'm going to make my own content. And if what you're doing is good, you're going to find your people. I think, especially with the way technology has advanced, you know, I just spent time bashing technology. I'm going to roll it back the other way and be like, you know, now with the advent of being able to kind of find your people online, why not do your own thing? Why not? Don't let it stop you.
You know, skipping a lot of stuff, I'm gonna hand this over to you, talking about Austen in Hollywood. I want to read this portion of The Genius of Jane Austen. This is regarding the films. If Jane Austen were alive today, she'd probably be appalled by the movie adaptations of her books. She would be baffled by the fact that the majority of films emphasize the romantic aspect of her novels when her intention was to subvert and undermine the romantic. Perhaps she would be vexed that her comic genius and precise social satire have been subsumed by Regency frocks, beautiful houses, and impeccably landscaped gardens. Though the performances in Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility were outstanding, the film's insistence on a highly idealistic presentation of romantic love ultimately vindicates precisely the values that the novel satirizes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Ang Lee. I'm sitting here going, what I associate that with.
Yes,
versus,
right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's such a left-hand turn in a lot of
Yes.
ways, because when I think of Ang Lee, I think of in terms of like, I guess sort of an almost sci-fi fantasy type angle. That seems to be sort of the bread and butter.
Correct.
But taking, and actually this is where, though, I am a huge fan of people with eclectic taste, or, you know, then they've got that sort of left-hand turn, and suddenly it's like, well, we're gonna Jane Austen like no one's ever Jane Austen before. We're gonna verb that now. And I was like, so this is stylistically odd, but, you know, there's nothing says you can't have that kind of extra interest or side jaunt layer. I mean, God knows if anybody took a look at what was in my iPod, they'd be like, how can those songs live together in the same thing? What do you mean you have Chumbawamba sitting next to Andrew Lloyd Webber next
How many people are sharing this iPod now?
they're all in here.
Yeah, oh God.
You scared? No, there's literally nothing that says you can't have those two seemingly very different things living side by side.
Yeah.
So as far as, it's so interesting. I feel like in a lot of ways we sort of rolled through the stuff I was talking about as we went along.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the way that Austen gets adapted, and actually it is a shame that there's sort of that veneer of, oh God, this isn't going to be accessible, because just of people who aren't really turned on to costume drama, or they're like, oh, it's so PBS and so Downton Abbey.
Right.
Like, I know people who didn't get into Downton just because they're like, oh, it's one of those. I was like, no, you need to get past that step of it. And has anybody, this is actually an interesting question, maybe our listeners, watchers, or you can feed me in, has anybody ever done like a plainclothes modern Jane Austen?
Yes, Clueless.
Okay.
Clueless is Emma.
Well, yeah, true enough. I'm just saying in terms of like presenting it straight out, kind of like, you know, Shakespeare in the Park does Julius Caesar.
Because it's satire, to make the comedy of manners, it works in the context where the manners worked, right? Okay. So there has to be a rewriting if you're going to put it in plain clothes, just to understand that world. So you mean like same exact words, same script and everything,
like a lot of Shakespeare, like it's vogue to do with Shakespeare.
Yeah, just go shopping at TJ Maxx.
Yeah.
Right.
Or like City Center did 1776 in plain clothes. Yeah. Like, it, you know, just tossing that element out of it. I
suppose it could be done. Yeah. I mean, I don't know why not.
Yeah. I think it would depend on the piece you're
doing. I'm sure the Jane Austen Society would have a lot to say about that.
Well, then maybe we could get some comments from them, and then they can come on the program, and we'll have a whole episode about how we've just ruined Jane Austen by suggesting that we aren't going to be wearing our frocks and finery. But no, I do think that can be a barrier for people.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and it's actually to the detriment of I'm like, don't let that stop you. I mean, sometimes I feel like then they go, okay, fine, so we're presenting this with all the finery, so we got to get names on this piece then, so people will come to see these actors do these roles. It's like they're trying to find ways in, almost apologetically for it.
Yeah, I'm sorry you have to sit through this, but if you do,
you'll get to see Matt Smith, or you'll get to say, okay, I guess I'm here now.
Well, he's actually also perfect.
When I was looking through the adaptations, because I'm actually sitting here as I was like, have I let this happen to me personally? Because even though I did grow up with a wide exposure to period pieces, to, you know, my mother had me watching things like Little House on the Prairie or what. Now that's a little bit different, but it's like you're very much set in a time period. And I'm like, where were my own biases on this? And did I let that affect how I approach the piece? Because I'm more of a sci-fi fantasy girl, so Austen is sort of out here. The Venn diagram does intersect in some places, but
it's not your fault.
It's okay.
It's not your fault, Kay. It's how it was presented. There's so much comedy.
Yeah.
There's so many mean people, like really mean. There's a lot of idiots. And instead of seeing all this social satire, we often end up getting, this is how beautiful life was at the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. It was perfect. Those impure waist and those little papillon curls at the, it was so, you know, like so perfect. That's so not what she was writing.
No, and even though it is, you know, that's why I guess this is why I brought up the plainclothes situation, because I was like, if you take that element out of it, does it stand up without? And, you know, who am I offending by saying let's just put everybody in sweatpants and see if this piece still stands up?
I suppose it works in it would work in any kind of staging where there is a class system. So that's why it does work set in high school.
True.
Right?
Oh no, absolutely.
Yeah, because you have to
Clueless,
have.
I saw.
Yeah, you have to have the structure to butt up against and to keep you, you know, in a box. You have to have that. You can't have it. You know, I guess you could set it in a theater. You know,
just see what happens.
See what happens. Now, like the kid, like Kiss Me Kate. You know, you could put it.
Yeah, so that I'm not sure. Like, I was sitting here going, I could go through all the cast lists of all these movies and this and that, but what I really first and foremost just rammed into, I was like, I think it's more interesting to just talk about accessibility of this entire genre. And you know, I think this is one of those things where it might actually be fun to have like a discussion panel of people.
I was thinking of that last night.
Hey, look, we have a spin-off episode.
I was thinking of that. If we ever do, you know, a live thing at a community theater, just the idea of like, so a lot of this came from the community theater feel, right? Because that's kind of all that was one of the most popular forms of theater then. But then, how translatable is it? That's a great conversation.
Well, hey guys, book us. We'll come and do that for you. We'll have Juliana show up in a full period outfit, and I will be here in my sweatpants from the gym.
Because you know I have it in my closet.
You know she has 5 wigs, and we'll figure out a way to have her wear them all throughout the course of the evening. Now you know you're buying those tickets right here, right now, coming to you live. We found an excuse for Juliana to wear all her pretty clothes.
We'll do the same scene, me in full period get up, and you in your sweatpants.
Yes,
and we'll see if it works.
Actually, I should have 2.
But they would have to be Lululemon if it's depending on the class.
I need to be careful what underpants I wear. In all things, you have to be careful what underpants. Did they worry about that in Jane Austen?